My sister berated her daughter's boyfriend for being poor until she realized his grandfather owned the venue they were getting married in. My niece Lauren had been dating her boyfriend William for 3 years. He was the only guy her mom never approved of, also the only guy who never cheated on her or used her for money. Janet was always subtle about her dislike for William, but she just presumed eventually they'd break up, so she never said much. Well, they didn't, and that's why everything came crashing down at the wedding rehearsal. It all started when William showed up in his dented Nissan. He jumped out with a huge smile and rushed around to open Lauren's door and offered her his arm. They seemed so happy, but both their faces dropped the second they saw Janet looking at them. Her face was already dark, and when they walked up to greet her, she stiffened up. She wiped her hands after shaking William's, and when he walked away, she zeroed in on him like a hawk. Before he could even make conversation with anyone, she approached him with that two-faced smile and loudly asked if his suit was from Goodwill because she recognized their tags. William didn't react to her comments. He just smiled and mentioned he enjoyed thrift shopping for environmental reasons. That seemed to make Janet angrier because she turned to her son and snarkily whispered, "I hate when the lower class try to fit in." I jumped to defend him, saying that he looked perfectly nice, and she immediately turned to me with that sharp look to say, "Isn't your house payment coming up?" My stomach dropped. My husband had left me with $400,000 in gambling debts I never knew existed, and she'd been helping with monthly payments ever since. The debt hadn't decreased much, still hovering around $400,000 because her payments mostly covered interest. She loved hanging it over my head, so I just swallowed my pride and went back to the party and prayed Janet wouldn't say anything else. But during cocktails, she escalated. She questioned William's consulting work and implied that's what everyone says when they're between jobs. William said that he could provide for Lauren and she didn't need to worry, but Janet scoffed and said she couldn't trust his word because of his appearance. Lauren told her mom to stop being rude, but she continued, saying that she was just looking out for her and brought up Lauren's ex, who used to hit her. She said he worked at a top lawyer firm, and William needed to be more like him. Lauren said she was happy with him, but Janet started going on a rant about her needing financial security, all while glancing at me. I just scarfed my food down and bit my tongue, hoping she would stop at that. But at dinner, Janet placed William at the far end with the plus ones. When Lauren protested, Janet said family sits together, and he wasn't family. I jumped in before I could stop myself to say that they've been together for 3 years, and that made him family. Janet smiled and said, 3 years. Wasn't that how long your husband hid his gambling? I shut up after that again, but I hated seeing how defeated Lauren looked all throughout dinner. The worst part came after dessert. Janet pulled Lauren into the coat room. I followed and heard everything. Janet threatened to cut off Lauren's student loans and the promised house down payment if she brought William to the wedding. She said, "If you want to marry poor, then you can live poor." She pointed me out as an example of marrying for love and ending up begging for money. Lauren sobbed and ran out. Her and William left right after. I didn't see William until the next morning at the venue. I was helping with the flowers when the coordinator suddenly looked panicked, telling me the owner had shown up and he never came to events. Janet overheard and assumed there was a problem, and instantly marched outside and I followed. In the garden we saw William talking to the owner, an elderly man. Janet stormed over and told the old man this was a private event, and William wasn't on the guest list. The old man looked at her calmly. "I know. I'm wondering why my grandson was removed from it." Janet's face went through several expressions. First confusion, then pure horror as she realized what was happening. William was the grandson of the man who owned this whole place. He could buy her 100 times over, and he was looking at her like he wanted to, purely out of pettiness. The old man turned to William and asked if this was the woman who'd been causing problems. William just nodded. Janet started stammering and trying to backtrack. She said there must have been some misunderstanding and that William was absolutely welcome. The old man wasn't having it. He told Janet he'd heard about the rehearsal dinner from William. He knew about the Goodwill comments and the seating arrangement. Janet's face went white. She tried to explain that she was just being protective of her daughter. The old man cut her off and said being protective didn't mean being cruel. He walked over to me and introduced himself as Theodore. He asked if I was the aunt Janet had been using as an example of failure. I nodded, too shocked to speak. Theodore patted my shoulder and said not to worry about it. Then he dropped a bomb. He told Janet that the venue was no longer available for the wedding. Janet's jaw dropped. She started begging and saying the wedding was tomorrow. Theodore shrugged and said she should have thought about that before insulting his family. Janet turned to William and started apologizing profusely. She said she didn't know who he was and that she was sorry. William just looked at her and said that was the problem. She only cared now that she knew he had money. Theodore told Janet she had 1 hour to clear out all the decorations. Then he walked away with William following. Janet stood there frozen for a minute. Then she snapped into action and started screaming at me. She blamed me for not telling her who William really was. I told her I had no idea either. She didn't believe me and said I must have known something. I walked away while she was still ranting. Inside, the wedding coordinator was already packing things up. Other vendors were arriving and being turned away. Janet was on her phone frantically calling other venues. None were available on such short notice. Lauren arrived an hour later in her wedding dress. She saw the chaos and asked what was happening. Janet told her William had sabotaged the wedding. Lauren asked what she meant. Janet explained about Theodore being William's grandfather and him canceling the venue. Lauren's face went from confused to furious. She told Janet this was all her fault. Janet tried to argue, but Lauren wasn't having it. She said Janet had been horrible to William from day one. She brought up all the snide comments and the threats from last night. Janet tried to defend herself, but Lauren was done listening. She told Janet she was going to find William and walked out. Janet turned to me again and demanded I fix this. I laughed and told her I couldn't fix anything. She threatened to stop paying my mortgage. I was terrified, but also angry. I told her to go ahead. I was tired of being her punching bag. Janet's face turned red and she stormed off. I sat down on the venue steps and tried to process everything. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. She was with William and wanted to meet me for coffee. I agreed and drove to the cafe she mentioned. When I arrived, Lauren and William were sitting together holding hands. Lauren had changed out of her wedding dress into jeans and a sweater. She looked happier than I'd seen her in months. They explained that Theodore had offered them his private estate for a small ceremony with just their closest friends. William said he'd never wanted Janet to find out about his family's wealth this way, but her behavior had left him no choice. Lauren squeezed his hand and told me she was done with her mother's manipulation. She said she'd rather struggle financially than live under Janet's control. I felt proud of her for finally standing up for herself and their relationship. I told them I supported whatever decision they made. William thanked me and said Theodore wanted to meet with me later. I was confused but agreed. We finished our coffee and I headed home to change, my mind racing with questions about why Theodore would want to see me. My phone was blowing up with messages from Janet. The notifications came in rapid succession. Texts, voicemails, even emails. I glanced at the preview of one message that said, "How dare you," in all caps, and decided to ignore them all. Around 2 that afternoon, I drove to Theodore's estate. The winding driveway was lined with mature oak trees, their branches creating a natural canopy overhead. The place was massive but not flashy, just elegant and understated with perfectly manicured gardens and a fountain that sparkled in the afternoon sun. Theodore met me at the door himself, which surprised me. A man of his wealth usually had staff for that. He was wearing a simple cardigan and slacks, looking more like a kindly grandfather than a business mogul. He led me to his study, a room that smelled of leather and old books. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with volumes that looked actually read, not just for show. He offered me tea from an antique silver service. I accepted and sat down nervously on a burgundy leather chair that probably cost more than my car. My hands shook slightly as I lifted the delicate china cup. He asked me about my situation with Janet, his voice gentle but direct. I explained about my ex-husband's gambling debts and how Janet had been helping with payments. The words tumbled out. How my ex had hidden his addiction until it was too late. How I'd come home one day to find our savings gone and liens on our house. Theodore nodded thoughtfully and asked how much I owed. I told him it was around $400,000 total. Janet's payments had barely touched the principal, mostly just covering interest to keep the creditors at bay. He didn't even blink, just stirred his tea with a small silver spoon. He asked if I had documentation of the debts. I said yes. Everything was in a filing cabinet at home. Court documents, payment schedules, correspondence from creditors. He asked me to bring them next time we met. I was confused but agreed, wondering why this successful businessman cared about my financial troubles. He then asked about my work history. I told him I used to be an accountant before everything fell apart. 15 years at a respected firm, specializing in corporate accounts. He seemed interested and asked why I stopped working. I explained that the stress of the divorce divorce and debt had broken me. I'd had panic attacks at my desk, couldn't concentrate on the numbers that used to come so easily. Plus, Janet preferred me dependent on her. She'd actually suggested I take a break from working to focus on healing, but that break had stretched into years. Theodore frowned at that last part, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on his desk. He told me his company needed experienced accountants and asked if I'd be interested. My heart jumped, but I tried to stay calm, gripping my teacup to hide my trembling hands. I said I'd love to, but I was rusty. It had been 3 years since I'd worked with financial software or prepared statements. He waved that off and said skills come back quickly, like riding a bicycle. He pulled out an elegant leather card holder and gave me his business card, the paper thick and embossed. He told me to call his HR director on Monday. I thanked him profusely, tears threatening to spill. He smiled warmly and said, family helps family, even extended family. As I was leaving, my feet feeling lighter than they had in years, William and Lauren arrived with a small group of friends. They were getting ready for their ceremony that evening. Lauren practically glowed with happiness, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She hugged me tightly and asked if I'd still be her maid of honor. I said absolutely, my voice thick with emotion. She squeezed my hands and said she laid out a simple dress for me in the guest room if I wanted to change. The ceremony was beautiful and simple. Just 20 people gathered in Theodore's garden as the sun began to set, casting everything in golden light. Lauren wore a simple white sundress instead of her elaborate gown. It was cotton and flowing, with tiny wildflowers embroidered along the hem. William wore jeans and a nice shirt, his face beaming as he watched his bride walk toward him. They wrote their own vows, and there wasn't a dry eye when they finished. William spoke about finding home in Lauren's laugh, and Lauren talked about how William made her brave enough to be herself. Theodore officiated since he was ordained online years ago, his voice strong and sheer as he guided them through their promises. After they kissed, we all cheered and headed inside for dinner. The dining room was lit with candles and fairy lights. We feasted on Theodore's cook's amazing food. Nothing fancy, just good home cooking that filled our hearts as much as our stomachs. It was perfect. No drama, no pretension, just love and happiness. Around 9, my phone rang. It was Janet. I saw her name flash on the screen and my stomach clenched. I stepped outside to answer, the cool evening air a relief after the warmth inside. She was crying and begging me to talk to Theodore. Her words came out in hysterical rushes. She said the wedding disaster was all over their social circle. People were laughing at her. She'd been uninvited from 3 charity committees already: the hospital gala, the art museum fundraiser, and worst of all, the country club's annual auction. I told her that wasn't my problem, my voice steadier than I felt. She got angry then, her tears turning to rage. She said she'd stop my payments immediately. I took a deep breath, feeling oddly calm, and told her to do whatever she wanted. I was done being controlled. She screamed that I'd be homeless within a month, that I'd come crawling back. I hung up on her. When I went back inside, Lauren asked if I was okay. She must have seen something in my face. I told her about Janet's threat. William overheard and looked concerned, his jaw tightening. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call, speaking quietly but urgently. 10 minutes later, Theodore joined us, looking serious. William explained the situation. Theodore thought for a moment, his fingers steepled under his chin, then made a call of his own. He spoke quietly for a few minutes, then hung up. He told me not to worry about the mortgage. His lawyer would contact me Monday to work out a payment plan I could actually afford. I started crying and tried to thank him. He just patted my hand with grandfatherly affection and said Janet had held that debt over my head long enough. The rest of the evening was wonderful. We danced to music from William's phone connected to speakers, laughed at Theodore's stories about his business adventures, and celebrated the couple's love. Lauren and William looked so happy together, stealing kisses and touches throughout the night. They left for their honeymoon around midnight. Just a road trip to the mountains, nothing fancy. They packed camping gear and hiking boots, but they were glowing with joy. I helped clean up, then headed home, my heart full. Monday morning, I woke up to 30 missed calls from Janet. My phone had been on silent, but the screen was full of notifications. I blocked her number without listening to a single voicemail. Then I called Theodore's HR director. She was expecting my call, her voice warm and welcoming. She scheduled an interview for that afternoon. I spent the morning updating my resume, my fingers remembering the format even after all this time, and picking out professional clothes from the back of my closet. The interview went well. They asked about my experience, my software knowledge, my approach to problem solving. They offered me a position starting the next Monday. The salary was more than I'd made before my life imploded. I accepted immediately, my voice cracking with gratitude. That afternoon, Theodore's lawyer called. He explained in patient detail how they'd bought my mortgage from the bank. My new payment would be a third of what it was. I could actually afford it on my new salary. I cried again, overwhelmed by this sudden reversal of fortune. Tuesday, Janet showed up at my house. I saw her car pull up and watched through the peephole as she marched up my walkway. I wouldn't let her in. She stood on my porch yelling about betrayal and family loyalty, her face red and blotchy. I told her through the door that she'd betrayed me first by using my debt to control me. She said I'd regret this when I needed help again. I told her I had a job now and didn't need her money. Her face went purple. She screamed that I was nothing without her. I closed the door in her face. She kept pounding on it for 10 minutes before finally leaving, her heels clicking angrily on the concrete. Wednesday, she tried a different approach. She sent her son Christopher to talk to me. He showed up looking uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot on my porch. He said Janet was devastated and wanted to reconcile. I asked if she was sorry for how she treated me. He admitted she wasn't. She just wanted access to Lauren back. I told him that was Lauren's decision, not mine. He asked me to at least consider talking to her. I said I'd think about it, but we both knew I wouldn't. He left looking relieved, probably glad to be done with his mother's errand. Thursday, Janet escalated again. She called my old friends and told them I'd stolen money from her. She said that's how I was suddenly affording things. Most of them knew better than to believe her. They'd seen how she treated me over the years, but a few called me asking questions. I explained the real situation, how Theodore had helped me get back on my feet. Most were horrified by Janet's behavior. My friend Sandra said she'd suspected Janet was controlling, but hadn't realized how bad it was. Friday, she showed up at Theodore's company while I was finishing paperwork for my new job. The building was all glass and steel, modern and imposing. Security wouldn't let her in. She made such a scene they had to threaten to call the police. I watched from a window as she gestured wildly, her voice carrying even through the glass. She finally left, but not before screaming that I'd ruined her life. My first week at the new job was amazing. My coworkers were welcoming and patient as I relearned everything. The software had been updated, but the principles were the same. My supervisor, Maria, said I was picking things up faster than most new hires. Theodore checked in on me daily, not in a hovering way, just making sure I was settling in okay. He'd stop by my desk with coffee sometimes, asking about my work and really listening to the answers. William and Lauren returned from their honeymoon glowing. They had slight sunburns and huge smiles. They'd found a cute apartment downtown, a third-floor walk-up with exposed brick and big windows. Nothing fancy, but perfect for them. Lauren had decided to finish her degree without her mother's money. She'd already applied for additional student loans and work-study programs. She was excited about earning her own way. William's consulting business was doing well enough to cover their bills. They were happy. Janet, meanwhile, was spiraling. She'd been dropped from more social committees. Her country club friends were distancing themselves. The story of her behavior at the wedding had spread everywhere, growing more dramatic with each telling. She tried damage control by claiming William had tricked them all. Nobody bought it. Even her closest allies were skeptical. 2 weeks into my job, Janet tried another tactic. She contacted my ex-husband in prison through a lawyer friend who still took her calls. She convinced him to write me a letter. It arrived on a Saturday, my name written in his familiar scrawl. He said Janet had told him about my new job and connections. He wanted money for his commissary account. He threatened to make my life difficult if I didn't comply, hinting at secrets he could share. I showed the letter to Theodore's lawyer. He said it was clearly extortion and he'd handle it. By Monday, my ex had been transferred to a different facility and lost his phone privileges. Janet's plan had backfired spectacularly. She then tried going after Lauren directly. She showed up at Lauren's apartment when William was at work. Lauren texted me as it was happening. She wouldn't open the door. Janet stood in the hallway crying and begging. She said she was sorry and just wanted her daughter back. Lauren told her through the door that sorry wasn't enough. She needed to see real change. Janet promised she'd change. Lauren said to prove it by leaving William alone for 6 months. Then they could talk. Janet agreed, but I doubted she'd last a week. I was right. 3 days later, she accidentally ran into William at a coffee shop. She'd been staking out his usual spots and timed it perfectly. She tried to apologize again, following him through the shop as he ordered. William just got his coffee to go and left. She followed him to his car, still talking, her heels clicking on the pavement. He told her to respect Lauren's boundaries or he'd get a restraining order. She backed off but looked furious. That weekend, she tried yet another approach. She threw a big charity event, one of those elaborate galas she loved. She made sure everyone knew Lauren wasn't there because of William. She painted herself as a loving mother trying to save her daughter from a gold digger. Most people saw through it. The ones who didn't weren't worth knowing anyway. The event raised less than half of what Janet had projected. People were voting with their wallets. A month into my new job, I got promoted. It was just a small raise, but it felt huge. I was rebuilding my life without Janet's help or control. I had my own desk, my own computer, my own responsibilities. Lauren was thriving in school. William's business had picked up. They were even planning a proper reception for their 1-year anniversary. Janet was not invited. She found out anyway through the social grapevine and called me crying. She begged me to get her an invitation. Her voice was hoarse, desperate. I told her that wasn't my decision. She said I owed her for all the years she'd helped me. I reminded her that she'd held that help over my head constantly, using it as a leash. She hung up on me. The next day, she did something that shocked even me. She went to Lauren's school and made a scene in the financial aid office. She told them Lauren was lying about needing loans. She said the family had money and Lauren was committing fraud. Campus security had to escort her out. Lauren was mortified. The financial aid office did an investigation but quickly cleared Lauren. Janet had actually helped prove Lauren's independence from family money. After the school incident, Lauren was done. She told me she was considering a restraining order. Her hands shook as she showed me the emails and texts from her mother. I supported whatever she decided. William had already started documenting Janet's harassment. They had security footage from the apartment building. They had witnesses from the coffee shop. They had the school incident report. Their lawyer said they had a strong case. Before they could file, Janet did something even worse. She hired a private investigator to dig into William's past. She was convinced she'd find something to prove he was after money. The investigator found nothing because there was nothing to find. But Janet didn't stop there. She started spreading rumors anyway. She told people William had a secret criminal past. She said he'd changed his name. She claimed he had other families. All lies, but some people listened. William's business started suffering. A few clients canceled contracts. That's when Theodore stepped in again. He had his own investigators look into who was spreading the rumors. They traced everything back to Janet. Theodore's lawyer sent her a cease and desist letter. It outlined all her harassment and defamation. It gave her 2 options: stop immediately or face a lawsuit. Janet panicked. She knew Theodore had the resources to bury her in court. She called me again, begging for help. Her voice was small, scared. I told her she'd done this to herself. She cried that she'd lose everything. I said maybe that's what needed to happen. She called me heartless and hung up. But the letters from Theodore's lawyers must have scared her because the rumors stopped. William's clients came back. Some even apologized for believing the gossip. 2 months passed relatively quietly. Janet was laying low. I thought maybe she'd finally learned her lesson. I should have known better. She was just planning her next move. It came at Thanksgiving. She'd always hosted the family dinner in her perfect house with her perfect table settings. This year nobody wanted to go. Christopher called to warn me she was planning something. He didn't know what, but said she'd been acting strange, muttering to herself and making lists. I thanked him and warned Lauren. We decided to have our own Thanksgiving at Theodore's. Just us, William, Lauren, Theodore, and a few close friends. The table was warm and inviting, nothing like Janet's formal affairs. It was perfect until Janet showed up. She'd hired another PI to follow us and find out where we were gathering. She pounded on the door demanding to be let in. She said we'd stolen her family. Theodore calmly went to the door. He told her she was trespassing and needed to leave. She refused. He called the police. While we waited, Janet stood on the lawn screaming. She called me every name imaginable. She said I'd poisoned Lauren against her. She threatened to destroy my new life. The police arrived and gave her a warning. She left, but not before promising this wasn't over. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I arrived at work to find Janet in the lobby. She'd somehow talked her way past security, probably with her old charm. She started following me, saying we needed to talk. I kept walking. She grabbed my arm and I pulled away. Security finally noticed and escorted her out, but she came back the next day and the next. Each time security removed her faster. By Thursday, they banned her from the building. She then started waiting in the parking garage. I had to get a security escort to my car. Theodore offered to get me a restraining order, but I wanted to handle it myself first. I called Janet that night. I told her she needed help. Her obsession was destroying her life. She laughed bitterly and said I'd already destroyed it. I told her she'd done that herself. She hung up on me again, but she stopped coming to my work. The next week was quiet, too quiet. I should have known Janet was planning something big. Christopher called me on Friday night sounding worried. He said Janet had withdrawn a large amount of money and wouldn't tell him why. He'd seen her meeting with some sketchy-looking guy at a diner. I thanked him for the warning and told Lauren and William to be careful. Monday morning, I found out what she'd been planning. I got to work and my keycard wouldn't work. The security guard looked confused and made a call. Turns out someone had called in a bomb threat using my name. The whole building had been evacuated at 3 a.m. They'd traced the call to a burner phone. Security had pulled footage from the store where it was purchased. The owner was ex-military and kept excellent records. The timestamp led them right to Janet on the cameras. I had to spend 3 hours with corporate security and local police clearing my name. Theodore was furious when he found out. His lawyers immediately filed charges. Janet was arrested that afternoon. Christopher called me crying. He said she'd completely lost it when the police showed up. She kept screaming that I'd stolen her life. They had to practically carry her to the squad car. She was charged with filing a false report and harassment. Her bail was set at $50,000. Christopher said he wasn't paying it. He was done enabling her. She spent 3 days in jail before her lawyer got her out. Those 3 days must have been hell for someone used to her lifestyle. When she got out, she looked different, smaller somehow. Her perfect hair was flat, her designer clothes replaced with basic court attire, but she still wasn't done. She showed up at Lauren's apartment at 2 a.m., hammered and crying. She pounded on the door screaming about forgiveness. The neighbors called the cops. When they arrived, she tried to run and fell down the stairs. She broke her wrist and got another arrest for hammered and disorderly. This time the judge wasn't so lenient. He ordered a psychiatric evaluation. The evaluation revealed what we'd all started to suspect. Janet was having a breakdown. The psychiatrist said losing control over Lauren and me had triggered something. She built her whole identity around being the powerful one who everyone needed. Without that, she didn't know who she was. The judge ordered mandatory therapy and a restraining order. She couldn't come within 500 feet of any of us. For a while, things were peaceful. I was thriving at work. Maria said I was her best hire in years. I'd paid off a chunk of my debt already. Lauren was acing her classes. William's business had fully recovered and was growing. We had weekly dinners at Theodore's. He'd become like a real grandfather to all of us. Then Janet started therapy and apparently decided everyone else was to blame. Her therapist called me one day. She said Janet had given permission for her to reach out. She wanted to do a joint session. I said absolutely not. The therapist said it might help Janet accept reality. I said Janet's reality wasn't my problem anymore. She seemed to understand and didn't push. But Janet didn't give up. She started writing letters. Long rambling things about how I'd betrayed her and stolen her daughter. I gave them all to the lawyer. He said to keep documenting everything. Then she started having flowers delivered to my work. The card said things like I'm sorry and please forgive me, but the flowers were all dead. Security started intercepting them. The restraining order meant she couldn't attend any family events. She missed Christopher's promotion celebration. She missed her own mother's 80th birthday. People started to notice. The family gossip mill was working overtime. Some relatives reached out to me asking what really happened. I told them the truth. Most were shocked. They'd seen Janet's controlling behavior but thought it was just her personality. 3 months into her therapy, Janet's therapist called again. This time she said Janet had made a breakthrough. She wanted to apologize properly. I was skeptical, but agreed to a phone call with the therapist present. The call was a disaster. Janet started off apologizing, but quickly devolved into blaming me again. She said I'd turned everyone against her. The therapist tried to redirect, but Janet hung up. After that failed attempt, Janet got sneakier. She created fake social media accounts to follow Lauren and me. We blocked them as fast as she made them. She hired different PIs to follow William. They were obvious about it too. William started taking pictures of them and sending them to our lawyer. The evidence pile was growing. Then came the wedding anniversary reception. Lauren and William had planned a beautiful party at Theodore's estate, just family and close friends celebrating their love properly this time. Janet found out the date somehow. She couldn't attend, but she tried to ruin it anyway. She called every vendor and tried to cancel their orders. Lucky for us, they all called to confirm. She'd been stupid enough to use her real name. The day of the reception, she did something truly crazy. She hired a plane to fly over the estate with a banner. It said, "Lauren, please forgive your mother." We all just stared at it. Lauren started laughing. Then we all were laughing. Even Theodore was chuckling. The pilot must have been confused. Janet had paid for an hour, but we just went inside and ignored it. The reception was beautiful. Lauren wore a simple cocktail dress. William looked handsome in his suit. They were so happy together. Theodore gave a touching speech about family being about choice, not blood. I cried happy tears. Christopher showed up halfway through. He said Janet didn't know he was there. He looked relieved to be away from her drama. That night, Janet completely lost it. She drove to Theodore's estate and rammed her car into the gate. The security cameras caught everything. She got out and started climbing the fence in her designer dress. Security called the police while keeping an eye on her. She made it halfway over before getting stuck. The police had to help her down. She was arrested again. This time, the judge had no patience. She'd violated the restraining order in the most dramatic way possible. He sentenced her to 90 days in jail and extended the restraining order to 5 years. Christopher looked relieved at the sentencing. He told me later he'd been walking on eggshells for months. With her locked up, he could finally breathe. Those 90 days were the most peaceful we'd had in almost a year. I got another promotion. Lauren made the dean's list. William landed a huge contract. We celebrated everything together. Theodore joined us for most dinners. He said we'd given him the family he'd missed since his wife died. We felt the same about him. Janet got out on a Thursday. Christopher picked her up but said she was different, quieter. The fight seemed to have gone out of her. She moved into a small apartment since Christopher wouldn't let her stay with him anymore. She had to get a job for the first time in decades. The humiliation must have been crushing for someone who'd lorded her wealth over everyone. She worked at a department store in the next town over. One of my old friends saw her there and said she looked tired. Her perfect appearance was gone. No more designer clothes or expensive haircuts. Just a regular person working retail. Part of me felt sorry for her. The other part remembered all the pain she'd caused. 6 months later, I heard she was doing better. Christopher said she'd actually stuck with therapy. She stopped talking about Lauren and me. She'd even made some friends at work. Regular people who didn't know about her past. He thought maybe losing everything had finally taught her something. Then Lauren got pregnant. She and William were over the moon. They told me first, both of them glowing with joy. We all cried happy tears. Theodore immediately started planning a nursery at his house for visits. The baby would have so much love. Everyone was thrilled except we all worried about Janet finding out. She did, of course. Small towns can't keep secrets. Christopher said she cried when he told her. Not angry tears, but sad ones. She asked him to ask Lauren if she could send a gift. Just one small thing for the baby. Lauren thought about it for days. Finally, she said yes, but through Christopher. No direct contact. Janet sent a beautiful handmade blanket. She'd learned to knit in therapy, apparently. It was soft yellow with little ducks. The card just said, "Congratulations. Love, Grandma." Lauren cried when she saw it. It was the first time Janet had respected a boundary. Maybe there was hope after all. The baby arrived on a Tuesday. A perfect little girl named Emma after William's mother. She had Lauren's eyes and William's calm temperament. Theodore was the proudest great-grandfather ever. He held her for hours, just staring at her tiny fingers. I was the proudest great-aunt. We all took turns helping Lauren and William adjust to parenthood. Janet found out about Emma through Christopher. He said she just nodded and went to her room. Later, he found her knitting tiny booties. She didn't ask to see the baby. She didn't make demands. She just quietly made things and gave them to Christopher to pass along. Each item came with a simple card. No manipulation, no guilt trips, just love. It took 2 years, but eventually Lauren agreed to let Janet meet Emma. The meeting was at a park with Christopher there as a buffer. I waited in my car just in case. Janet showed up looking nervous. She'd gained weight and her hair was gray at the roots. She looked like a normal grandmother, not the perfect society woman she'd been. The meeting went well. Janet was respectful and quiet. She let Emma come to her instead of forcing it. When Emma smiled at her, Janet cried. Real tears, not the manipulative ones we'd seen before. She thanked Lauren for the chance and left when the hour was up. No drama, no demands, just gratitude. After that, they met once a month. Always supervised, always in public. Janet never pushed for more. She seemed genuinely changed. Christopher said she'd apologized to him for years of manipulation. She'd even apologized to some of her former friends for her behavior. Most didn't forgive her, but she accepted that. I ran into her at the grocery store 3 years after everything started. She looked so different I almost didn't recognize her. She saw me and froze. I expected anger or manipulation. Instead, she just said she was sorry. Not a long speech, just, "I'm sorry for everything." Then she left. I stood there shocked. Later, Christopher told me she'd wanted to apologize for years, but didn't want to violate the restraining order. It had expired, but she still kept her distance. She'd really changed. The therapy, losing everything, jail time. It had all finally broken through her narcissism. She'd never be in our lives like before, but maybe that was for the best. Lauren and William had another baby, a boy named after Theodore who'd become such an important part of our family. Janet sent another blanket through Christopher. This one was blue with little bears. She never asked for more access. She seemed content with what she had. The monthly visits with Emma continued. Emma called her grandma Janet and loved the toys she knitted. I was running a whole department at work by then. My debts were nearly paid off. I'd even started dating a nice man from accounting named Terry. He made me laugh and didn't care about my past. Lauren had finished her degree and started teaching. William's business was thriving. We all had dinner at Theodore's every Sunday. Our chosen family was complete. Looking back, it's crazy how much changed from that one rehearsal dinner. Janet's cruelty had backfired so spectacularly. She lost everything trying to control us. But in losing control, she'd finally found herself. The real Janet, not the perfect image she'd projected. It took destroying her life to save it. We never became close again. The damage was too deep. But we reached a place of peace. She respected boundaries. We accepted her growth. Emma and her brother knew her as the grandma who knitted them things. They didn't need to know the history. Maybe someday Lauren would tell them, but not yet. Theodore passed away peacefully 5 years later. He left William everything, but we'd expected that. What we didn't expect was that he'd left me enough to pay off my house completely. The note said, "For the aunt who showed courage when it mattered." We all cried at the reading. Even the lawyer teared up. Janet came to the funeral. She sat in the back and left quietly after. But she'd come to pay respects to the man who changed all our lives. Without Theodore's intervention that day, who knows what would have happened. He'd saved us all in different ways. Even Janet in the end. Life went on. Kids grew. Careers advanced. Love deepened. The drama of those early days faded into family legend.